The most important statement is JPMorgan enabled Epstein.
Do you believe that JPMorgan should face a criminal investigation?
I do.
Hi, Senator Wyden. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for doing this. It's an important story.
Absolutely. And I know that you and your team, from months of talking about this, have done more investigation into this Jeffrey Epstein financial situation than pretty much anyone. What do you think is the most explosive piece of evidence in the file that the public still doesn't know about?
When Epstein was alive and was tracking women and girls, the bank flagged a small number of transactions adding up to something like $4 million. After his death in custody, the bank filed retroactive suspicious activity reports totaling almost $1.3 billion in thousands of transactions dating back to 2003. So to me, the most important statement is JPMorgan enabled Epstein.
So just so I'm clear for the audience, because I've looked at your charts and I've read all the documents, but you're saying that there was $1.3 billion reported in these suspicious activity reports, SARs as they're called, from 2019 onward, but prior to 2019, even though these transactions go back to 2003, they only reported just over 4 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. And to me, what it says is the JPMorgan people looked the other way when it came to actually doing what was important, because during all those years, Epstein was trafficking women, making vulnerable people in more dangerous positions. And this bank knew better, and it had experts who knew better, and yet they continued to do it.
Now, is it clear from the documents that you've reviewed who made the decision not to report those some 5,000 wire transfers when they actually occurred?
Well, of course, JPMorgan isn't willing to get into those issues. So that's why I've introduced legislation, much like what was done on the Justice Department side, not the financial side, which is Treasury, to force that those records, those materials, those bank materials be made public.
And that's because right now there's no way of identifying the individuals who should be investigated for knowingly enabling Epstein.
We have a fair amount of information, but to really do the job right, the Treasury Department has to step up and make available the information that they have, what are called suspicious activity reports, which are what they sound like when you see stuff that looks ominous, that looks dangerous. You're supposed to report it to law enforcement, and they didn't do it.
Okay, and then correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I read it was that there was like a 5-year blackout from 2003 to 2008. There were 0 suspicious activity reports filed, despite millions in cash withdrawals. Is that correct?
Yes.
And, could that be a coincidence, or does it require intentional suppression?
Certainly anything can be something that is open to interpretation, but that's why following the money is so important. I think Pam Bondi can't be trusted with those Justice Department materials, and God only knows what she has sent to other places that isn't going to go to the Congress. With following the money, the banks have copies, the Treasury Department has copies, and the reality is my investigators have seen with their own eyes, their own 2 eyes. They saw those 4,000 plus SARs that wire transfers that went out, and nobody followed up.
I mean, it's mind-boggling. But so your memo that you recently released shows that JPMorgan executive Mary Erdoes, is that how she says it? Erdoes was in pretty near constant communication with Epstein for years, even after his conviction. Do you believe her conduct warrants criminal scrutiny?
I definitely think that there needs to be further criminal investigation of JPMorgan, and she in particular should be asked some relevant questions. She seemed to be in constant contact with Epstein. And long after people knew that Epstein was engaged in this activity, she was having all kinds of conversations about birthdays and activities. And they were just very, very close in terms of continuous kinds of conversations. And you bet, I think there are questions that need to be asked and answered.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that testimony should probably be under oath because I
No
think that there
question,
is.
no question about it. And Mr. Dimon has some questions to respond to as well. And I've asked questions of him. I mean, he constantly says that he didn't know anything about it. I find it very hard to accept the proposition that someone who is that powerful and that influential and that involved at his bank didn't know anything about this.
It's either he knew about it or there seems to be an indication that, that's got to be willful ignorance. Like you've got to be deliberately or you're being irresponsible if you're running this bank.
I've asked questions of him so that we could finally get some answers because so far he has been able to just say, oh, I really didn't know anything about it.
Now, your memo shows that the head of private banking, and I've seen some of the emails between JPMorgan's head of private banking and Epstein himself, that there was like advice being given on how to structure these withdrawals to kind of avoid reporting.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that our investigation found that bank executives ignored compliance officers who were alarmed by what Epstein was doing and seemingly withheld evidence of potential money laundering and even coached Epstein on how to sanitize these really shady financial dealings.
I mean, do you think something like that should be treated as obstruction of federal anti-money laundering laws?
My wife agreed to marry me because she said I was a lawyer only in name only because I was director of the Gray Panthers in Oregon. I think that this is a very troublesome matter as it relates to money laundering, and I want to get to the facts. That's the point of following the money. I mean, consistently, if you look at the history, that's how Al Capone got caught, is by following the money, and that's what we're going to do, and we're going to continue.
Now, your memo also shows that JPMorgan kept working with Epstein even after terminating him because of his influence over Leon Black. Is there anything in the financial trail that shows Epstein acting as an intermediary for other billionaires as well?
Well, I think that the company was interested in referrals from Mr. Epstein during that period. Mr. Epstein, as you know, read in various publications, always seemed to charm financial executives and very wealthy individuals out of more money. That's what happened with, Leon Black. We were told that somehow Epstein was going to be giving legal advice and the like, and accounting advice. And later on, Black's own people said Epstein didn't know what he was talking about. So yes, I think that there are substantial questions about whether the bank continued to talk to Epstein because they were trying to get business referrals.
I mean, it's really baffling how some of these people have avoided any type of accountability in their role in doing this. I mean, your investigators found that Epstein's accountant, Harry Beller, and his lawyer, Darren Indyke, executed hundreds of millions in suspicious transfers. Why is it that neither one of them have been charged or, investigated even?
There are a whole group of what people who are familiar with this case call the henchmen, who basically have the same question that you just asked that ought to be applied to them. And I believe that continued work needs to be done to follow the money and see exactly what their involvement was as it related to harming women and children who had been trafficked.
Speaking of, people who've been trafficked, and there is one person who's been held responsible, although whether or not she continues to serve her sentence remains to be seen, but that is Ghislaine Maxwell. And Epstein paid her at least $25 million from what I understand, including a one-time $19 million transfer. Can you talk a little bit about that and whether JPMorgan should have treated those payments as indicators of a criminal enterprise?
We have not gone into that in the same detail that we have the separation from the not making timely information available with respect to the SARs and the like. We haven't spent as much time with Maxwell, but we're going to continue to ask about those enormous payments because, if anything, that is such a alarm bell that ought to send out messages to people. That too also requires our getting more information and following the money.
And it's these emails that are going back and forth where it's clear that the communication was ongoing, and
They were like this. They were talking about social matters. They were talking about financial matters. The idea that they were somehow walled off from each other. In fact, the main wall is the cash wall that JPMorgan has for Epstein as one of their biggest accounts. This question that they weren't talking with each other is just way off base.
I mean, it seems that even after the emails continued, even after the relationship, whether, the financial relationship ended, they were still continuing to email back and forth in a very chummy way, asking for, discussing travel, discussing birthdays, all sorts of indicia that there was really not a cutoff of the relationship at all.
All the back and forth smacks of people who are very close, talk all the time, talk about business and personal things.
Given everything that you have uncovered, the underreported SARs, the executive involvement, the structured withdrawals, do you believe that JPMorgan should face a criminal investigation?
I do. I believe that's the only way to get at this array of questions that you've asked me. Our report, I think, went into a very detailed description of what our investigators found, but there's a lot more that should be dealt with. We've got more to do, but certainly there is information today that, in my view, warrants a criminal investigation. And certainly the idea of being so slow with respect to reporting so many SARs and not doing the things that are necessary to stop Epstein over those years, that alone makes it clear we've got to have an investigation.
Now, the question that I sometimes get, and I'm sure you get the same, because obviously Pam Bondi has only been leading the Department of Justice for, the last 10 months or so. Why is it that the Department of Justice failed to act up through now?
Well, first of all, let's not let the Department of Treasury off the hook, because I've asked Mr. Bessent, Treasury Secretary, 3 times to give us access to the records, and he is stonewalled. Now, with respect to Bondi, she has a different lane. She has the Justice Department lane. We've had our focus on the Treasury Department lane, but both of them, and I think it was very good that we won the vote that made the information from Ms. Bondi available, put me down as being distrustful about the proposition we're really going to get everything. And that just makes it all the more important to follow the money and particularly go after these big leads that I've outlined today.
And so, based on all the evidence that you've reviewed, do you think that there is a path forward to holding the folks accountable who have been, major enablers of Jeffrey Epstein and his sex trafficking network? Is there a path for accountability?
We are going to stay at it until, first, all the information that we've been talking about is going to be public. And I think that's not a blue thing. It's not a red thing. That's an all-American thing. The American people are entitled to it. And then we're going to set about to look at what approaches you need to offer so this doesn't happen again. For example, banks should not be allowed to sit for years on what amounts to billions of dollars worth of sex trafficking payments and SARs activity.
Yeah. And so what's the thing that we should all expect, if we're whether it's talking to the survivors of Epstein's trafficking network or the general public, what should we know about what comes next and what we can do?
What we should know is, just as the Justice Department had to release, information, not financial information, it's time for the Treasury Department to release the information they have about all the matters that we're talking about, so we know where the money went, how it was used to enable sex trafficking, what it was used with respect to certain people who have been involved in extensive trafficking. So that's how you get to the bottom of this, is to make that information available. We need to have a recorded vote on the floor of the United States Senate on my legislation that says that the information, the major information that the Treasury Department has on the follow the money activities of Epstein, be made public.
All right. Well, we'll get on it. And you heard Senator Wyden, everyone. We got to start shouting, get loud about that and get your legislation passed to get all of those documents out there. Thank you for being such a relentless fighter on this and for really bringing all of this to light. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.